What happens when a marathon starts at 2-hour pace and somehow gets even quicker? Pause, quote, incoming. Sabastian Sawe, Kenyan marathoner, once said, "I'm so happy. It's a day to remember for me." And when you look at what happened in London, that line suddenly makes perfect sense. Sawe surged to 1:59.30 and turned the men's race into something unforgettable. The top 3 men all finished under the previous best, which made the front of the field feel unreal. And on the women's side, Tigst Assefa added another major headline to a day already packed with history. But before that final time even came into view, London was already setting up one of the fastest marathon days ever seen. The 2026 London Marathon was massive in scale and even bigger in ambition. Around 59,000 runners took part, setting a new event record and giving the city one of its most crowded and energetic race days ever. But the real story was at the front. The elite men arrived with serious depth. The elite women brought a powerful challenge of their own, and the weather gave them nearly ideal conditions for fast racing. Cool temperatures, light wind, a course ready for speed. So this is not just a story about a marathon. It is a story about how London became the stage for one of the most remarkable endurance performances in recent memory. And once the elite races began, it became clear very quickly that this was not going to be a normal London marathon. The opening pace and early signals. Estimated read time, 3 minutes 20 seconds. Have you ever wondered what it looks like when the front of a marathon refuses to settle? From the first steps, the men's elite race was moving at a pace that sent a clear message. Nobody was easing into this one. The opening 5K came through in 14:14, which is an astonishing tempo for the start of a marathon. That early split alone showed that the leaders were not planning to wait, and the names at the front mattered. Sabastian Sawe, Kiplimo, and Kejelcha were all part of the early rhythm, and that immediately made the race feel loaded with possibility. The field was deep, the pace was sharp, and the pressure was already building. Then came the next markers. The 10K stayed hot. The 15K stayed hot. The halfway point still looked like a race on the edge of something special. That is what made London so gripping in those early miles. It was not just fast, it was controlled fast, purposeful fast. Now, you might be wondering why that mattered so much. Because in a marathon, early speed is only important if the athletes can hold it long enough to make the later stages matter. And in London, the first half was not a burst, it was a statement. Over on the women's side, the tone was just as serious. Obiri, Tita and Jocelyn Jepkosgei moved through the opening 5K in 15:39, and then they kept pushing. By halfway, they were still on a pace that pointed to an extraordinary finish. That made the women's race feel like a parallel story of its own, not just a background note. Think about that for a moment. 2 elite fields, 2 very fast starts, 2 races already hinting that the day could go far beyond normal expectations. But that is only part of the story. What happened next would change everything we thought we knew. The men's race turns into a true test. Estimated read time, 3 minutes 30 seconds. Remember what we discussed earlier? This is where it all connects. Once the men passed halfway, the race stopped feeling like a group effort and started feeling like a direct test between the strongest runners on the course. Sawe stayed composed. Kiplimo stayed close. Kejelcha, in his marathon debut, refused to fade away. That made every kilometer feel heavier because nobody was giving the others a moment to relax. At 25K, the leaders were still moving at an extreme pace. At 30K, they were still right on the edge of the previous best. That alone would have been enough to make headlines on most days. But London was not done. Then came the surprise that made the race even more compelling. Kejelcha, on debut, moved to the front. Not as a cameo, not as a brief flash. He was genuinely part of the race's central story, and that changed the mood completely. Now the question was no longer whether the pace was fast. The question was whether anyone could keep this level going all the way home. And somehow, they did. At 35K, Sawe and Kejelcha were still separated from the rest. By 40K, the pace had become almost hard to believe, especially so late in the race. The final push was not cautious, it was not defensive, it was bold, relentless, and remarkably consistent. Then came the finish. Sabastian Sawe crossed the line in 1:59:30. That is the kind of result that turns a marathon into a reference point. Kejelcha followed in 1:59,041. Kiplimo came through in 2:0,028. The top three men all finished under the previous best. That is the detail that tells you just how deep this race really was. It was not only a single brilliant performance, it was a front pack that kept producing elite times all the way to the line. And perhaps no one said it better than Sawe himself. After finishing, he looked at the time and made it clear just how much the moment meant to him. Pause. Quote, incoming. Sabastian Sawe, Kenyan marathoner, once said, "I'm so happy. It's a day to remember for me." Resume. That is the feeling London created. Not only speed, but significance. This was the part most people never hear about in historic races. The final time matters, yes, but so does the way it was built. And in this case, the final miles were just as astonishing as the finish itself. While the men were producing a finish few people thought possible, the women's race was creating its own headline performance. Tigst Assefa and the women's showcase, estimated read time, 3 minutes 10 seconds. What happened next was just as impressive on the women's side. Tigst Assefa, Helen Obiri, and Jepkosgei formed a lead group that kept the pressure high from the start. The pace was quick early, and by the halfway point they were still moving strongly enough to suggest that something special was possible. Assefa then did what great marathoners often do. She waited, she watched, she stayed calm while the tempo stayed demanding. And when the final stretch arrived, she made her move. That was the key moment. She crossed the line in 2:15,041, taking another major London title and adding another major performance to her name. Obiri followed in 2:15,053, with Jepkosgei right behind in 2:15,055. The closeness of those finishes told its own story. This was not a slow tactical day. This was a race where every move mattered, and that is what made the women's event such an important part of the larger picture. It was not overshadowed by the men's result. It stood beside it. Together, the two races made London feel like a full-day showcase of endurance at the very highest level. Now this is based on publicly available information and is presented here purely for educational awareness. If you step back and look at the full event, the pattern becomes clear. Deep fields, fast pacing, strong conditions, and athletes on both sides responding with performances that elevated the entire marathon. That is rare, and it is exactly why this London Marathon will be remembered not just for one result, but for the standard it set from the first miles to the final sprint. But that is not the only reason this day will stay in people's minds. Kejelcha, estimated read time, 40 seconds. London 2026 was not just fast, it was historic from top to bottom. Sabastian Sawe gave the men's race its defining moment. Kejelcha and Kiplimo helped turn that moment into a full-field showcase. And Tigst Assefa added another major chapter on the women's side, with a performance that matched the scale of the day. So when people look back on this marathon, they will not remember just one split or one finish. They will remember a race where nearly every major checkpoint felt like a turning point. History does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it arrives mile by mile until suddenly the final time tells you everything. If this video made you see the marathon a little differently, consider subscribing because there is a lot more to explore.